We stop for the
There you go.
questions. We'll stop it after.
So I am the first justice here in the Barnstable District Court. I am also the recovery court judge, and I've been working in recovery/drug court since probably about 2005. I was appointed to the bench back in 2002, a little over 20 years ago. And I was assigned over to the Yankton District Court, but sat in all the district courts here in southeastern Mass, as far west as Fall River, as far north as Plymouth, and then the two islands, Orleans, Barnstable, Falmouth. So I've got a pretty good idea of what's going on in the court system. My background is I grew up in Cape Cod. I'm a graduate of Dennis Shamrock Regional High School. Graduated in 1983. Went on to the University of Massachusetts and then made that decision, like most people should, to get off the rock for a little while. And when I graduated from UMass, I went and lived in Boston and assistant district attorney in the Suffolk County DA's office for about 17 years prior to me, and then I got the judgeship. So I was a prosecutor. I'd never been a defense attorney. I was a prosecutor my whole career before I got on the bench. 2005, Judge Reardon came to me one day and said, you kind of need to back up. I'm going to be retiring at some point. And would you be interested? And I said, absolutely. And at that point, I was Judge Reardon's backup. When he wasn't available, I would go and sit in the session. I was lucky enough to be able to go to a number of trainings throughout my career, whether they be in at the Judges Conference or the Judges College in Reno, and then spent a lot of time in Washington, D.C., at a lot of different think tanks, and I've spent every year, at least a week out of the year, I participate in the NADCP, which is the National Drug Court Professionals trainings, and they take place in different parts of the country, and we talk about a lot of the latest trends about things that are going on, the science of addiction, how to try and intervene in that if we can, and how we deal with what we don't call defendants any longer, we call them participants, because we don't want to give that stigma. Certainly, they're, for the most part, the people that I see in my recovery court are people that never wanted to be in the position that they are, but circumstances happened. Addictions took place and they had to feed them some way. And usually that led to criminal activity, whether they be possessions or larcenies, breaking and enterings, a lot of the crimes that people are very concerned with, certainly people coming into your homes, stealing the things that are important to you. So it was a very, kind of a balance that we had to try to take on, that we wanted to treat the addiction part and also make sure that the criminal justice part was being dealt with as well, because not only the people that are in front of me, there are people just like you at home that are concerned about their own safety and people coming into their homes and taking their things. So we wanted to make sure that we were responding to that constituency as well. So during my time in recovery court, and for those of you who don't or are not familiar with it, recovery court is a specialty court, kind of an offshoot of the regular daily session. Right now, we have approximately 28 different recovery courts throughout the Commonwealth. There are 62 district courts throughout the Commonwealth of Massachusetts, and in some of the more rural areas, we share drug courts. So there'd be a drug court in a central area that we can, because there's just not enough clientele in some of the smaller areas to have their own court. So if we take down here, as an example, I'll take people from Orleans that want to participate in my recovery court. I mean, I'll take people from just about anywhere if their recovery brought them to the Cape for whatever reason, whether it be treatment or just to get away from where they were, they find themselves in a little bit of trouble, certainly we'll take them at any point in time. So I think there's been a lot of change over the years. First, they were all called drug courts, and we've gotten away from the stigma of calling them drug courts because you don't want to put that word right out at the beginning. So now they're referring to now as recovery courts. We also have throughout the Commonwealth mental health courts that deal with the majority of the person's problem would be a mental health issue. There are co-occurring issues, and a lot of them sometimes are substance abuse, and they're not just heroin and cocaine, but a lot of them are prescription meds that they've been taking over the years. So there is a strong push, and we're rolling out new ones. We are going to roll one out in I think Concord and Air are going to share one that's going to open soon. New Bedford is going to open them soon, and a lot of the big urban areas have them. We also have a number of veterans courts that we support throughout the Commonwealth. Here on the Cape, we don't have a dedicated veterans court because we've done some of the statistics down here. There are a lot of veterans down here, but there are not a lot of veterans who find themselves into the criminal justice system. They may have the issues, whether they be substance abuse or those kinds of things, but they're not finding themselves into the criminal justice population. So we have one now presently in Plymouth, and we have one in Brockton. And if I have people here in Barnstable that need those kinds of services, I usually refer them to the Brockton court because that's where they're getting the services. They're getting them at the VA in Brockton. So so when they're going for their services, they're going to Brockton every day. You've seen the vans on the highway, they're picking them up wherever they are and then bringing them to Brockton for their services. So it makes sense that if they're going to be doing that, the courthouse is 3 blocks away from where the VA is, probably a little more than 3 blocks, but not too far. So they do that. One of my other jobs is I am the specialty court committee chair. So I pretty much have oversee over all those courts, whether they be recovery courts, mental health courts, or veterans courts. And I work on behalf of the Chief Justice Forts to try and make sure that we're doing them in a thoughtful and way that follow the science and follow the rules, or not the rules, but the principles of recovery court nationwide. So I think here in Massachusetts, we are very dedicated to that. I think we're showing in the trial court, that the trial court is making a great effort to try and make these specialty courts thrive and become very important. So in my recovery court, in one of the other things, I also run the recovery court in Plymouth. I sit there on Wednesdays and I sit here on Fridays. So between those 2 courts, I probably have somewhere, and it's like everything in the world, COVID's changed everything. My census prior to COVID in Barnstable was probably 40 to 50 that were in my recovery court at any given time. That's dropped to about 20 to 18. In Plymouth, my census was probably in the high 20s, maybe close to 30. I don't think I ever pushed 30, but pretty close. And now I'm down to about 12 to 15. And that's just it's a product of a lot of different things. Identification. There's always that stigma that this is a setup and no one wants to do it. And some of these guys or gals get into the House of Corrections. No one, and you guys have all seen it, addicts don't want other addicts to get clean because then they don't have anybody to hang out with. So they will talk down that part of it when they're in jail. This is a setup. You're gonna go to jail. Nobody cares about you. It's all, so a lot of times when it's offered, they won't do it. And usually it will take, 2 or 3 times to figure out that you do your, as I explain to them sometimes you're doing life on the installment plan. You're doing 60 days, you get out for 3 months, you come back for 30 days, you get out for a year, you come back for 6 months, you're out for 6 months, and you're back in for another year. So usually at some point in time, that usually hits them over the head and said, you know what, I just spent the 20s. I just lost the 20s of my life. And I spent the 20s in jail with a little bit here and there. And now I'm ready to kind of give this a shot and try. So the way in which the court works is when you're, I have a pretty robust team. I have 2 probation officers. In Massachusetts, there are some states that have predispositional courts where they don't have to admit to their cases prior to coming into drug court. In Massachusetts, we have a post admission or post conviction model where the people that come into recovery court are on probation. And the way in which we assess them, we're looking for the, I hate to say the worst of the work, but we're looking for the high risk, high need population and trying to get them to finally realize that this is not the path that they want to be on, and that we're willing to, kind of do all the services that we can to help them along that way. So when they come into my, when their lawyers or themselves present themselves to recovery court, I have a licensed clinical social worker on my team who assesses every single participant that will come into my recovery court. She'll ask them all the questions about their addiction and whether or not they're ready for what they're going to be partaking here. And clinically, she will assess them as to what their needs are. Once she makes that determination, she would present that to me at a team meeting at a table, just like you guys are sitting at now, where it will be discussed and whether or not this person would be appropriate for recovery. I'm one of those guys, I'll take anybody. I just think it's important. And unless my clinician is telling me that this is just not a good fit, then I will listen to her. But sometimes I'll certainly overrule it. One of the things we don't want, I don't want to bring in younger kids with no records, because now I'm sitting them in a room with people that have had, 10, between 5, 8, 10, 12 years of use, and that have considerable records. I don't want to put someone that could be vulnerable to a population like that. I don't think that is in their best interest. We will do everything we can to find them treatment, and that might be outside of the recovery court. And I've certainly been known on occasion, or 400, to marry a case, but that it stays with me during that journey, so that they know they have some stability that they might not get. One judge who may just be willing to just say, I'm done with it, and you're going to jail. You might get someone who might be a little soft the next time. So consistency wise, I will take some of those cases and keep them that I think that are important, but I don't want to put them in the room. So once you're accepted, also around the table are my 2 probation officers. There are 2 now. 2, sometimes 3. I have defense attorneys who are assigned that just take drug court. They take other cases, but they take drug court cases. And those lawyers are pretty special, that they really want to do this kind of work. And it's somewhat counterintuitive to what they're really supposed to do, because we're all talking about them at the table. And one of the requirements of recovery court is that as a defendant or a probationer, you have to give up that right, that we're able to talk about you in this setting. And they're able to, the lawyers are able to listen and offer what they may know, which may be a little bit different than what usually might happen. Usually lawyers don't say anything about their clients because they need to represent them, and they represent themselves legally, but they also have that best interest of what's going on in their recovery journey at heart. And sometimes that becomes, it gets conflict. So also at the table, I have people from the jail. I have the reentry coordinators who are instrumental in finding me beds to send people to. We also have, right now, I'm in the 4th year of a federal grant that allows me to have recovery professionals, coaches that work for an organization called the Gavin Foundation out of Boston. And they are also on the team. They're assigned to each and every participant, whether you're in jail, out of jail, in treatment or out of treatment. They're that person's sort of stability while they're in recovery court. Now, a lot of that, it's almost, I hate to say it's almost too much, but sometimes when you have too many, as we all know, too many cooks in the kitchen, you really spoil the soup. So a lot of times what's happening out of when they're coming into recovery court, I'm giving them a recovery coach. Then they're coming out of jail. The jail is automatically giving them a recovery coach right out of the jail. And then depending on where they're getting the treatment, whether it be at Duffy or Gosnell or whatever else, they'll also have someone who would be assigned to them for a period of time once they're in their, once they're released. And as you guys all know better than I would ever know, my participants will use them to their fullest extent, and they'll play one off the other if they have to. But usually they'll see that and they'll kind of try to put a stop to that. Their jobs are to just be that resource for them. They'll get calls in the middle of the night. They will take them to doctor's appointments. Because a lot of them don't have their licenses or don't have the ability to get around. They'll take them to their recovery appointments. And some of them that are that good, they'll just take them wherever they want to. We need to make that balance that they're not going to be kind of just calling them up to say, hey, can you bring me down to Cumberland Farm to get me a pack of smokes? That just doesn't really work. Now we're getting into that. You're taking advantage of what you have. So once someone is accepted into my recovery court, there are 3 phases, and I also say there's a 4th. There are three phases of drug court. The first phase, I will see every single participant every week for 4 months. So they will come to me here in Barnstable, they come to me every Friday, and in Plymouth, they come to me on every Wednesday. If they are successful in those 4 months, then they graduate to phase 2, and I'll see them every other week. So they'll have that extra week to keep doing the things that they're doing. And when they're successful after that 4-month period, they will see me once a month. And usually that's when they've kind of picked up that momentum in their recovery, and they're doing well, they're working, they've found suitable housing, or they've graduated from inpatient, they're on to halfway houses, or they're just living in sober living, where they have sober houses, or some of them are back home. Then the 4th phase, which we don't really call the 4th phase, is them being on just regular probation with no parachute. They're kind of on their own. The probation department will monitor them and make sure that they're doing the right thing. And when probation monitors them while they're in drug court, it's a very high monitor. They have to speak to their probation officer at least once, or at least once every other week, as well as going to drug court. And then other people are checking in on, the clinicians checking in on them, make sure that they're doing their recovery. Some of the participants, if they're not in residential, they're either here on the Cape, they go to the Community Justice Support Center. It's changed like 3 or 4 times. It used to be called the Office of Community Correction. They have an office here up in Independence Park. In Plymouth, they have it up in Portage Park. And in that, I can order people to go to those places. And in those places, they have a dedicated programming where they will be assessed just like they'll be assessed anywhere else. And they'll be determined what kind of treatment they'll need, whether it be one-on-one, a group setting, They offer high set, so that the ones that don't have high school equivalencies or diplomas, I'm requiring them to make sure that they get at least that. And they are also connected with Mass Rehab. I think that's changed its name 47 times again too, where they would get some job training, and they would hopefully kind of pick a career path that they could get themselves on. And there's the resources and the money available now to get those things is unbelievable. That someone really wants to work it right, they can get 5 or 6 months worth of housing paid for. They can get job training, education, so you get your GED, and there's a lot of other treatment things that they would be open to by taking those paths. So once they finish when someone comes into my recovery court, if you're coming in after resolving a case with the district attorney's office, your probation period is not less than 2 years. So they have those 2 years. If you did everything right and you never got into trouble, theoretically you would finish drug court in a year. You wouldn't have any hiccups or any probation violations or any hearings, any relapses, those kinds of things. So that usually there are some who I have in phase 1 for pretty much their whole probationary period. There are some that slide right through and they know they've got the journey, they know what their path is. Some of them, I have a number, and some people say, why do you do it? I'll take anybody for the 5th time. So I've had participants who have graduated and through my whole drug court, been on to lead productive lives. I have one now who's in a program in New Bedford. Just had a bad day, and but it was a doozy, and they found themselves in a heap of trouble, a lot of criminal charges, and if they come to me and say, Judge, I need to do it again, come on back. I don't have a problem with that. And I think the structure, all these kids, when I talk to them, structure is a big thing. They really want the structure. Sometimes they can't do the structure, but they want it. And usually it will take 4 or 5 times. I could have someone come through my court, it only lasts a month, but then they're back 6 months later and say, I want to do it again. And now they get 3 months, or 5 months, or a year. Then they wash out. My success rate, again, since we have now taken a different approach, and we are now trying to, we didn't have a lot of money to do a lot of this stuff. We are now applying for grants and having some money come flowing through to be able to try to do some statistics, which we don't have. 1, to sell our programs, and 2, to get people to come. And the recidivism rate, although I don't have the exact numbers, has dropped considerably when people are coming through drug court. So they may be going back, whether it be to the House of Corrections or maybe going back to square one, but usually it's for a new use, missed screens, technical violations in nature, and not a lot of new cases that kind of pop up. We have the ones that have new cases, and sometimes when they go on that big vendor, then they're going to get a new criminal charge. A lot of my guys, none of them, they don't have licenses because, like we all know, when they're feeding their addiction, they're not renewing their licenses, they're not getting insurance for their cars, they're not registering their cars, they're speeding and doing all those things, so that when I look at their record may only be 1 or 2 pages, but their driving record might be 6 pages. And then the one thing that I always tell my guys, I tell them all the time, I go, I'm the least person you need to worry about sending you to jail. It's how we're going to get your license back. Because no matter what if I told the registrar of motor vehicles that you don't give this kid's license back, or I'm gonna send you to jail, he would tell me to go pound sand. He has, or they have no the hold to the court system. They are an executive agency that makes decisions in the best interest of other people, not just the person that's in front of them, but the general public at large, and whether or not someone should have a license. And as I always tell them, the Constitution did not say that you should have a license. So a license is a privilege and not a right. My big thing when I'm dealing with these guys is how do we mitigate your criminal exposure so that you have the opportunity at some point to go back and get your license. And there are ways in which to do that by way of disposing of cases. If you're driving on a suspended license and you pick up and then you go to court and you admit to that and you're found guilty and given a $500 fine, the next time you do it, it becomes a subsequent offense where now the penalty is not less than 60 days, now it's a correction to the fine, or I could sentence you up to a year. And then when those start to all piggyback, they all have license ramifications. So, you lose your license for 60 days, and then you get another one. Well, the registry doesn't give you 60 days, and then say, okay, we're gonna let those 60 days and the other 60 days run together. They run them consecutively. So you do the first 60 days, and then the next one kicks in. So if you got one in Barnstable, you got another one in Falmouth, you got one in New Orleans. By the time you figure it all out, your exposure to jail is not that big, but your exposure to losing your license for a really long time, it happens. So one of the things that, in terms of disposing of cases, the registry doesn't treat what we call a continuance without a finding, which is an admission to sufficient facts. And if you successfully complete your probation, the matter is dismissed. Those aren't treated as license losses for the registry purposes. They are probation period, but not suspendable periods of time. So that's one of the big things is, and in this day and age, people look at people's records, and we all know that, and trying to look for jobs, trying to get yourself into a career where it's going to be more meaningful than just working at Cumberland Farms or wherever it is. So those kinds of things I'm very mindful of in terms of how I dispose of cases, and then they have the right to come back at some point in time if they wish after a long period of time. But it's 3 years for misdemeanors and 5 years for felonies, and ask the court to seal your record or seal those cases. If you were convicted, then I think it's 5 and 7 felonies for 7 and misdemeanors for 5. You could petition the Commissioner of Probation to just ask those charges be again sealed. So we as the court and the law enforcement will see them, but when an employer asks for those to see if someone has a record, they would come back with there's no record. You don't have those charges any longer. So those are some of the things that they can do when they get down the road. I have a lot of my recovery court graduates that will come in, and we talk about that stuff about, at some point in time when you're down the road and we're in a position where you can, show me that you're doing that stuff. I have no problem doing it. So one of the biggest things when I took my job as a judge, I expected that I would have a bunch of people in front of me, and I would be making decisions in 2 or 3 minutes after looking at somebody, looking at their record, hearing the facts, and I'm going to make a decision. That's my job. When I go to places like Fall River in New Bedford, I may sit in a busy arraignment session or a pretrial session. I may make decisions on over 100 different defendants who may come in front of me. in one day, not over a course of a week, in one day. So I will spend 30 seconds to 4 minutes on each of those people, depending on what happens. If it's just a continuance, I'm just going to say, okay, come back another day. If it's an admission, I'm going to ask the defendants a lot of questions that they're waiving a lot of their constitutional rights. I'm going to listen to the facts from the district attorney, and then the lawyers are going to make arguments as to what they think should happen to the defendants. And then I'm going to make the ultimate decision based on what I hear from everybody as to what I think the appropriate sentences. So, so when I'm in big courts, that's what's going to happen. In drug court, these guys are in front of me every week. They come, I know who they are, I know who their parents are, I ask questions about what their school life is, and for me, all my guys will tell you, I bleed green and white because I went to DUI, and I don't like Barnstable. So,
You must really hate Santa.
there's only so much I can do. There's only so much I can do. So, so as we all know, the two of the Yarmouth is a DUI district. Then I have the Barnstable. Then I have Sandwich. Sandwich, we never had that big a problem, but Barnstable was always a big rival when I was growing up. So, and a funny story on the outside, when I took over the presiding job, I took over from Judge Catherine Hand, who's now on the appeals court, and she's a Barnstable High School graduate. And at my swearing in, she gave me a Barnstable High School sweatshirt and had my name on the side. It says First Justice. And I told her, I said, that is never. I may hang it up in the office, but it's never gone. So I know who all these people are. I get to know them when they come up in front of me. This is their opportunity to talk to me. They can tell me whatever they want. I want to know what's going on in their week. I want to know what's going on in their recovery journey. I want to know what's going on in their family lives. And I want to know what is either bothering them or not bothering them. And some of them will come up and they will just spit out the same thing week after week. But some of them, and it takes a little while because as I'm sizing them up, they're definitely sizing me up. And I think I have, I've been down here now, well, I've been there pretty much my whole life, but as a judge for 20 years, people know who I am. They know before they walk in the door. If it's Judge X, they're going out the door. If I'm on the bench, they're coming in. It's just the way it is. So I give them that opportunity to sort of tell me, and it bears some fruit because I'll tell you, I don't know why they do it. I can never figure it out, but they all friend me on Facebook. I don't talk to them. I don't respond to them. I don't do anything. But I watch. They put something out there. I'm looking at it. And usually at our team meetings, we talk about the participants. We talk about what their week was from the probation officer's standpoint, from the recovery coach, from the recovery coach's standpoint, and we talk about all that stuff. So when I get out on the bench, if I have some good tidbit of information that I want them to know that I know, I tell them, and they look at me like their jaw just fell out of the floor. Like, what? How did you find out about that? I just look at them and I go, I know everything. So don't try to pull one over because it's only going to be worse. And the good part about that is what I'm looking for from all those guys is that they tell me before I tell them,
Right.
and that there's some accountability. If you tell me before I tell you, then like at home, the punishment's not going to be as bad. You're not going to get held probably, depending on what it is. If it's something really bad, I have to do something. But if you're willing to stand up there in front of the whole group and pretty much admit your sins, then that's progress for me for what these guys do. They're all trying to hide stuff. They all lie. But if I can try to break that cycle, and for those of you in here who have children who are court involved, they never would trust a judge, because they go in front of a judge, they admit this stuff, and next thing you know, they're in cuffs and they're downstairs, right? So they have nothing else to do but just bitch and moan about, oh, that judge screwed me. I hate that. I hate that guy. I hate that girl. They ruined my life, as opposed to peeling the onion all the way back and say, well, if you didn't do what you did, and you didn't tell me you did it, then, you wouldn't be in this position. Then they look at me and go, you're right. But now, when they're in front of me, they've got someone who they can actually talk to. Like, if you just stood up in front of them in a main session, whoever the defendant is in front of you, you're not going to get 10 minutes out of the judge's time, because there's 700 people behind it to say, how you doing today? In my session, they have as much time as they want to do that. And I think I try to foster a relationship with all of my participants, that I'm not out to hurt them. I'm out to do as much as I can to help them. But if you really screw up, I am going to come down. So, and for the most part, they all know it. And they're also the ones that will just sit there and say, hey, I did it. I get it. Whatever you got to do to me, I get it. My hope is they don't do so much that I have to just sort of kick them out. But some of them make that decision too, that, if I've been doing it for time and time and time again, I may say to them, we need to come to some amicable end, and you need to tell me what you think that is. I may not agree with you, because they're all going to say, well, you should just terminate my probation. I go, well, I'm not going to do that. But I'm not going to, I'm not going to hurt you. And they'll say, well, maybe you should just give me 90 days. And I may think about it. I may say, okay, that seems fair. And again, that's them having some control over their own lives, and that they have some input, that someone's going to take them serious and listen to them. They're not going to say, give me 90 days when they know they're going to, they did something such a whopper that they're going to get a year or two. They're not going to do that for the most part. But for me, it's been, it's been bittersweet. I look around in the room and I'm looking at the pictures, and there are 2 or 3 who have been through my recovery court and not made it. And that was a big shock for me, because it didn't happen in the first 5 or 6 years that I did this. And I remember my first was a Native American, and it really sent me for a loop. Like I really had a deep connection with them. I really liked them, and that's the problem. Is I like these guys. I like they call them kids at that point, and I really have a genuine connection with them. And I feel like I let them down, that they couldn't turn one way or the other. That was my first one, and then as they go on, I can't do that with every one of them. I would be probably next to them at that point if I keep doing that stuff. But it was a big culture change for me, and now it's it's not. I probably, if I had to think about it, I probably would may have 10 in the 15 years I've been doing. 15 years that I've been doing this. So I consider myself probably lucky at that point, and that's two different jurisdictions that I've been in, and it hurts. It's just the way it is. So we're more than happy to answer any questions.
I'll go to the Zoom first and see. Does anybody on Zoom have any questions at all? Oops, yep.
I'd just like to say thank you for doing what you're doing. It sounds like you're making a difference.
I
How
hope
can,
my wife, I don't know if my wife would agree with that, but
She will.
well, I talked to your wife. She told